खबर आपको देंगे न्यूयॉर्क से, जहां पर सलामती कौंसिल में अमन, इंसाफ और क़सीरुल-जेती निज़ाम से मुतालिक मुबाहिसा हुआ है। पाकिस्तानी मुस्तकिल मंदूब आसिम इफ्तिखार का सलामती कौंसिल में मुबाहिसे से खिताब। आसिम इफ्तिखार ने कहा, कानून की हुक्मरानी अमन, इंसाफ और इज्तिमाई सलामती के लिए नागुज़ीर है। आज बैनुल-अक़वामी कानून के एहतराम को कड़ी आजमाइश का सामना है। यकतरफा इक़दामात ने रियासतों के आलमी क़वानीन पर एतमाद को मजरूह किया है। जब कानून ताकत या मसलहत के आगे झुकेगा तो अदम इस्तेहकाम गहरा होगा। तनाज़ात मजीद जकड़ पकड़ लेते हैं और पुरअमन बक़ाए बाहमी खतरे में पड़ जाती है। यकतरफा इक़दामात को मामूल बनाने की कोशिशें इज्तिमाई सलामती को कमज़ोर करती हैं। उन्होंने कहा, पाकिस्तान ने खुद भी ऐसी खिलाफ वर्जियों का सामना किया। भारत ने गुज़िश्ता साल पाकिस्तानी खुद मुख्तारी की खिलाफ वर्जी करके जारियत का इर्तिकाब किया। पाकिस्तान ने हक़ के दिफा के जिम्मेदाराना, मुहतात और मुतनाज़िब अंदाज में इस्तेमाल किया। उनका मजीद क्या कहना था, आपको सुनाते हैं।
President, we wish to congratulate Somalia for its successful presidency this month and for organizing this important debate. We see this as a continuation of a series of high-level debates around the UN, multilateralism and international law over the last year, including in this council. I would also like to thank Secretary General Guterres, Chairperson of the AU Commission, Mr. Ali Yusuf, and the founding president of the African Institute of International Law, Judge Yusuf, for their insightful remarks. The Secretary General described rule of law as the beating heart of the UN Charter, and Judge Yusuf urged fully respecting and strengthening it. It is therefore obvious that this debate is timely. The erosion of respect for international law is increasingly translating into conflict, humanitarian crises, and weakened multilateral cooperation. Reaffirming the international rule of law is therefore not an abstract legal exercise. It is a prerequisite for peace, justice, and collective security. The purpose of international law is to inject stability into the international system by making interstate conduct predictable and subject to agreed rules and boundaries. When that function is compromised, international law risks losing its meaning and compliance can become optional. A stable, peaceful, and productive international order can only endure if the rule of law is applied equitably, consistently, boldly, and without discrimination. Yet, today, respect for international law is being tested as rarely before. Selective application of legal norms, erosion of treaty obligations, and unilateral actions have weakened trust among states and strained the multilateral system anchored in the UN Charter. When law yields to power or expediency, instability deepens, disputes entrench further, and peaceful coexistence is jeopardized. The core principles of the Charter, sovereign equality, non-interference, political independence, and territorial integrity, the prohibition of the threat or use of force, and self-determination are being increasingly challenged. Attempts to normalize unilateral actions outside the Charter undermine collective security and weaken the credibility of multilateral institutions. Pakistan itself has experienced such violations. Last May, India carried out an unprovoked military aggression in breach of international law and Pakistan's sovereignty. Acting in accordance with Article 51 of the Charter, Pakistan exercised its inherent right of self-defense in a responsible, restrained, and proportionate manner. Our response established that there can be no new normal based on coercion or impunity. Respect for international law remains the only legitimate norm governing interstate conduct. And that conflict also reminded that the root cause of instability in South Asia remains India's illegal occupation of Jammu and Kashmir in gross violation of Security Council resolutions. The continued denial of the right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people has grave human rights consequences and imperils durable peace in the region. India's unilateral suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty is another blatant breach of international obligations, threatening the lives and livelihoods of millions and endangering peace and security. Pakistan rejects the weaponization of water and critical natural resources. Treaty compliance is a cornerstone of the international legal order. As a country with unwavering faith in international law and multilateralism, Pakistan is committed to pacific settlement of disputes. And this was evident when, within weeks of defeating the military aggression, Pakistan led the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2788 on peaceful settlement of disputes by this Council last July, reaffirming the Council's collective commitment to dialogue, mediation, judicial settlement, and other peaceful means as the first recourse in resolving disputes. President, while some in the West are saying it now, we know that due to double standards and lack of full compliance, the international system has often failed and fallen short of fully benefiting many countries, particularly in the global South. Yet, the developing nations have continued to place their faith in the UN Charter and in an equitable and just international order. Their aspirations for peace, security, and development must remain central to the evolution of multilateralism and the reform of the United Nations. A reform towards equality, democracy, and accountability, away from unbridled power and entitlement. A reform for all, privilege for none. Reinvigorating the rule of law is essential to restoring that confidence. President, but not everything is pessimistic, as Judge Yusuf also pointed out. Despite geopolitical tensions, the international legal framework remains resilient. The entry into force of the 𝐕𝐢𝐬𝐿 agreement and the International Law Commission's work on sea level rise demonstrate the capacity to respond to emerging challenges. We also welcome the advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice on Palestine and climate change. These opinions must be respected and applied universally, because selective acceptance would undermine the authority of the court and confidence in international adjudication. As the Secretary General also noted, rule of law is foundational to our work in this Council. It requires full compliance with Security Council resolutions on all items on its agenda. The situation in Palestine starkly illustrates the consequences of selective adherence to international law. The continued denial of the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination, persistent violations of international humanitarian law, and disregard for relevant UN resolutions erode the credibility of the international system and international legitimacy. A just and lasting peace can only be achieved through full respect for international law and equal application of legal principles to all. President, the corpus of international law stems, amongst other sources, from the resolutions of this Council. It is imperative that member states fulfill their obligation under Article 25 of the Charter to implement the Council's decisions. To strengthen compliance and prevent selective application of international law, we would like to make the following suggestions. First, the Security Council should devise effective mechanisms to systematically monitor the implementation of its own resolutions and to take action in cases of persistent non-compliance. Second, the Council should engage the International Court of Justice more systematically to strengthen compliance and prevent selective application of international law. We would like to make the following suggestions. First, the Security Council should devise effective mechanisms to systematically monitor the implementation of its own resolutions and to take action in cases of persistent non-compliance. Second, the Council should engage the International Court of Justice more systematically where legal disputes on its agenda risk undermining the implementation of its decisions, particularly in situations of prolonged political deadlock. Third, the Council should institutionalize regular legal briefings by the Office of Legal Affairs on situations on its agenda, including on the legal implications of non-compliance with Council resolutions and international treaties to ensure that the Council's deliberations and decisions remain firmly grounded in international law. Finally, the UN organs and bodies should have easier and more frequent recourse to ICJ's advisory opinions on specific disputes and on fulfillment of the legal obligations of member states and international organizations. President, the international rule of law cannot be sustained by deliberations alone. It requires consistent conduct and credible accountability. If multilateralism is to endure, law must prevail over force and principles over expediency and justice over impunity. Pakistan remains committed to a UN Charter-inspired, rules-based international order in which disputes are resolved peacefully, obligations are honored, and the United Nations serves as a true guarantor of peace, justice, and dignity for all.